Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're looking at something I think specifically chosen for you guys. A YouTube video titled, "These 5 Types of Women Will Cheat on You."
Oh, wow.
Now,
That's a bold
I know
statement.
that title may sound a little intense,
Yeah.
but stick with us. We're going to break it down and see if we can pull out any nuggets of wisdom from this.
Mm.
Let's call it a unique perspective on relationships.
Yeah, it's a very provocative title, isn't it? These 5 types of women will cheat on you. And the channel it's from Not Your Brother already kind of gives you a sense of the tone they're going for.
Yeah,
But that's what makes this so interesting for a deep dive. We
uh,
can analyze not just the content itself, but also the way it's being presented and who it's targeting.
exactly. So let's jump right in. The first type this video highlights is the materialistic woman. And the speaker argues that women who are fixated on designer labels, luxury vacations, basically anything that screams expensive, are more likely to be unfaithful. He even suggests that men who use their wealth to attract these women are basically setting themselves up for trouble.
It's a bold claim for sure. But what's interesting to me is the underlying assumption that there's some sort of direct link between materialism and infidelity. Now, there's no denying that some people are drawn to wealth and status, and some relationships can become transactional. But is that always a recipe for cheating? Not necessarily.
Right, because not every woman who enjoys a nice handbag is automatically going to cheat.
Right.
What I found interesting was how the video connected this back to societal pressures. He even mentioned how women are constantly bombarded with messages about beauty standards and achieving a certain lifestyle.
Yeah, that's a really important point to consider. We live in a culture that often equates material possessions with success and happiness, especially for women. So is it any wonder that some might internalize those messages and seek validation through those external markers? It's not necessarily about being inherently materialistic, but maybe more about seeking validation or striving for a certain image.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And it definitely adds another layer to this whole materialism equals cheating equation. Now, the second type the video focuses on is the woman who keeps her relationship a secret. If you haven't met her family, her friends, if she avoids posting about you on social media, the video suggests she's probably not serious about you.
Hmm. It makes you think about the role of social integration in a relationship, right? When you're truly committed to someone, you naturally want to bring them into your world, introduce them to the people who matter to you. It's a way of solidifying the relationship, of showing the world, hey, this person is important to me.
And the video actually goes a step further and says that even posting photos together online doesn't count. Apparently, the real sign of commitment is being introduced to family and friends. It's like there's a hierarchy of relationship milestones, according to this guy.
Yeah, it's an interesting distinction to make. Of course, every relationship progresses at its own pace, and there are legitimate reasons why someone might be hesitant to share their relationship publicly, at least initially. Maybe they have complicated family dynamics, maybe they're just a private person. It's not always a red flag, but it's definitely something to consider and to communicate about openly within the relationship.
Right, communication is key. So on to type number 3, according to
Mhm.
our YouTube relationship expert, the woman who needs constant attention. The video basically says that if she's always demanding your time, your energy, your validation, she's likely to stray if you can't meet those needs.
This brings up the whole conversation about attachment styles and emotional dependence. We all have different needs for attention and affection, but when those needs become excessive or stem from insecurity, it can definitely create imbalance in a relationship.
And the video actually uses an interesting example, women who jump from relationship to relationship quickly.
Hmm.
He seems to be implying that this is a sign of an underlying need for validation, maybe even a fear of being alone.
Yeah, that's where attachment theory comes into play. If someone has an anxious attachment style, they might constantly seek reassurance and validation from their partners. And while it's important to be attentive and responsive to your partner's needs, it's equally important to establish healthy boundaries and encourage a sense of independence.
Okay, this is getting pretty deep. Let's move on to type number 4. And this one is definitely relevant in the age of social media. The woman who's overly responsive to direct messages from strangers. The video claims that if she's quick to reply to those DMs, especially if they're from attractive men, it's a sign she's open to flirting and potentially cheating.
This ties into a larger issue of how we navigate relationships in the digital age. Online interactions can sometimes create a false sense of intimacy, and it's easier to engage in behaviors online that we might not consider appropriate in person.
And what's interesting is that the video highlights this competition aspect, the idea that some people get a thrill out of conquering others online, even if they have no intention of actually meeting up or pursuing a real relationship. It's almost like a game for them.
That's a fascinating psychological angle to consider. It speaks to this need for validation, maybe even a desire for control or power within those online interactions. But of course, it also raises the question of where we draw the line between harmless flirting and behavior that could be considered disrespectful or even hurtful to a partner.
Right, because what one person considers just flirting, another person might see as a major betrayal of trust.
Hmm.
It all comes down to communication and setting clear boundaries within the relationship.
Okay.
Okay, on to the final type on our list. The woman who's fresh out of a relationship. The video basically says to steer clear of anyone who's recently gone through a breakup because they're likely not emotionally ready for a new commitment and might just be looking for a rebound.
This touches on the whole process of grief and recovery after a breakup. Even if a relationship wasn't healthy or fulfilling ending, it is still a loss and it takes time to process those emotions and heal.
He even uses the slang term "muin," which I guess means being overly clingy or emotionally dependent after a breakup. He's basically saying that getting involved with someone who's still moopin is a recipe for disaster.
It definitely highlights the importance of being mindful and respectful of someone's emotional state, especially after a breakup. There's no set time frame for how long someone should wait before entering a new relationship, but it's crucial to ensure they've had sufficient time and space to heal and are genuinely ready for a new commitment. Otherwise, it can lead to a lot of heartache for everyone involved. So there you have it. The 5 types of women who are apparently destined to cheat according to this YouTube video. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, though. Do you think any of these hold any real weight? Or is it all just for entertainment value?
That's a great question, and it's something we're going to dive into even deeper in the next part of our deep dive. Stay tuned. So we just went through these 5 types of women that this YouTube video says are more likely to cheat. But it's important to remember that these are just one person's opinions, right? Not exactly
Yeah.
scientific fact.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And while the video might be entertaining, it's important to approach it with a critical eye. For instance, the way the speaker frames infidelity as this calculated, almost predatory act, especially on the part of women, feels a little oversimplified, don't you think?
Yeah, I agree. It's almost like he's trying to create this sense of fear or paranoia in his audience.
Yeah.
Like there are these dangerous women lurking around every corner waiting to pounce.
Yeah, it's a very black and white perspective. And human relationships, especially when it comes to matters of the heart, are rarely that straightforward. Reducing infidelity to a checklist of external signs ignores the complexities of human behavior and the nuances of individual relationships.
Right. It's like saying if a woman wears red lipstick, she's going to cheat. It just doesn't make sense. And it completely disregards the fact that infidelity can happen in any relationship, regardless of gender, social status, or, how many designer handbags someone owns.
Precisely. Infidelity is often a symptom of deeper issues within the relationship itself, like a lack of communication, emotional disconnect, unmet needs. It's not about fitting into a certain type, but rather about the dynamics between two individuals.
This makes me think back to what we were discussing about materialism. While the video presented it as a red flag for infidelity, we talked about how it could be a reflection of societal pressures and the constant bombardment of messages about beauty and success.
Exactly. And that brings up a really important point. How much of what we see as signs of infidelity are actually just reflections of broader societal issues? We're constantly being fed these narratives about how we should look, how we should behave, what success looks like, and those messages can seep into our relationships in ways we might not even realize.
It's like we're all playing these roles, trying to live up to these impossible expectations. And sometimes that pressure can spill over into our personal lives and create cracks in our relationships.
And that's where self-awareness becomes so crucial. Understanding your own values, your own needs, and how you might be influenced by societal pressures can help you navigate relationships with more clarity and authenticity.
So if we're not supposed to take these signs as gospel, what are we supposed to do? How can we build trust and navigate the complexities of modern relationships without falling into these traps of oversimplification and paranoia?
Well, I think it starts with open and honest communication. If you're feeling insecure or noticing behaviors in your partner that concern you, address those issues directly, but in a way that's respectful and non-accusatory.
It's about expressing your feelings and concerns, not about pointing fingers or playing the blame game. And of course, it's equally important to be open to hearing your partner's perspective as well. Relationships are a two-way street after all.
Absolutely. And sometimes that means seeking outside help. If you're struggling to communicate effectively or resolve conflicts on your own, a therapist or counselor can provide a safe and supportive space to work through those challenges and strengthen your relationship.
So while this YouTube video might offer some entertainment value and maybe even spark some interesting conversations, it's important to take it all with a grain of salt. Human relationships are far too complex and multifaceted to be boiled down to a set of rigid rules or predictable signs.
The real takeaway here is the importance of critical thinking. Don't just blindly accept what you see or hear, especially when it comes to something as personal and nuanced as relationships. Question those assumptions, challenge those stereotypes, and engage in thoughtful dialogue both with yourself and with your partner.
It's about looking beyond the surface, unpacking those generalizations and focusing on what truly matters, building a strong foundation of trust, respect, and open communication.
Now, shifting gears a bit, let's delve into some of the psychological aspects that the video touches upon, albeit superficially. For instance, the whole idea of the woman who's fresh out of a relationship and potentially using a new partner as a rebound. This actually ties into some fascinating concepts in psychology, like attachment theory and the stages of grief and recovery after a breakup.
Right. And he even used that slang term "moopin," which
Right.
basically means being clingy or overly attached after a breakup. It's almost like he's painting a picture of this emotionally vulnerable woman who's going to latch on to anyone who shows her attention.
It's a bit reductive, to be honest. While it's true that some people might seek comfort in a new relationship too soon after a breakup, it's not fair to generalize and say that everyone who's recently single is going to be emotionally unavailable or clingy.
And it also plays into this stereotype of women being overly emotional and irrational after a breakup, which isn't really fair or accurate either. Men experience heartbreak and emotional turmoil too.
Absolutely. It's important to remember that everyone processes grief and loss differently, regardless of gender. And while some people might jump into a new relationship quickly, others might need weeks, months, or even years to heal and feel ready for a new commitment.
And that's where empathy and understanding come into play. It's
Mhm.
about being mindful of your partner's emotional state and respecting their need for space and time to process their experiences.
Exactly. Now, another point the video touched on, albeit briefly, was the whole idea of attention-seeking behavior. He basically said that women who constantly demand attention are more likely to cheat because they're trying to fill some sort of void. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's a bit simplistic to say that everyone who seeks attention is automatically going to cheat.
Hmm.
I mean, we all crave attention and validation to some extent, right? It's a basic human need.
Absolutely. And healthy relationships involve a certain level of attention and responsiveness to each other's needs. But there's a difference between healthy attention seeking and behavior that's rooted in insecurity or a need for constant external validation.
Right, and that's where things can get a bit tricky. How do you distinguish between someone who simply enjoys feeling loved and appreciated and someone who has a deeper emotional need that's not being met?
That's a great question. And again, it comes back to communication and self awareness. Being able to articulate your own needs and understand your partner's needs is crucial. And if you're noticing patterns of behavior that concern you, it's important to address them in a way that's constructive and supportive.
So it's not necessarily about judging someone for wanting attention, but rather about understanding the underlying motivations and working together to create a relationship dynamic that feels balanced and fulfilling for both partners.
Yeah, precisely. And that brings us back to the bigger picture here. Relationships are complex and they require constant effort, communication, and a willingness to understand and support each other. It's not about following a set of rules or looking for red flags, but rather about cultivating a deep connection built on trust, empathy, and mutual respect.
And that's something we can all strive for, regardless of what any YouTube video might tell us. It's funny, even though this YouTube video was supposed to be about these like 5 types of women who will cheat on you,
Right.
we ended up having like a much deeper conversation about relationships. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting how something so seemingly superficial can kind of lead to these more profound reflections, isn't it? Like we've talked about societal pressures,
Yeah.
attachment styles, complexities of communication,
Hmm.
all these factors that really do play a role in how we navigate relationships in general.
And I think it also makes you realize that there's no like
Yeah.
one size fits all answer.
Yeah.
Like there's no magic formula for
Right.
creating a cheat-proof relationship.
Yeah.
It's about
Absolutely.
so much more than
It's
that.
not about ticking boxes or looking for a warning sign.
Yeah.
What this deep dive has really highlighted, for me at least, is the importance of individual understanding,
Yeah.
both of yourself and your partner. Because ultimately, the most fulfilling relationships are built on a foundation of mutual respect, open communication, and a willingness to grow and evolve together.
It's about being curious,
Yes.
asking questions, having those sometimes difficult conversations
And that's
about needs, expectations, boundaries.
Yeah. Being willing to kind of challenge those preconceived notions and stereotypes that we might have absorbed from society or the media or even, provocative YouTube videos.
Yeah. Speaking of those preconceived notions,
Yeah.
I'm curious about your take on the video's focus on women specifically.
Yeah.
It felt very one-sided, almost like it was placing the blame solely on women for infidelity.
Yeah, I think it is important to acknowledge that infidelity is not a gender-specific issue. It can happen in any relationship, and it's rarely about one person being inherently bad or untrustworthy.
Yeah, it's often a symptom of something deeper,
Right.
a breakdown in communication and unmet needs, or maybe even just a lack of compatibility.
Precisely. And while this video chose to focus on women, it's crucial to remember that men are just as capable of infidelity, and the underlying reasons are often the same regardless of gender.
Yeah, and this whole conversation has really made me think about how important it is to define your own values and expectations in a relationship. Like, what does fidelity mean to you?
Yeah.
What are your non-negotiables?
And to have those conversations very openly and honestly with your partner. Because what might be a deal breaker for one person might be something that another couple is perfectly willing to work through or, come to some sort of agreement or understanding about.
And those definitions can evolve over time, too.
Exactly.
What was important to you 5 years ago might look completely different today.
Right.
And I think that's okay.
Yeah.
The key is to just keep those lines of communication open and be willing to adapt and grow together.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a question to ponder. In a world that's so saturated with information, especially about relationships, how do you filter out the noise and define what truly matters in your own connections?
That's such a great question because it is so easy to get caught up in those external messages and comparisons.
Right.
But ultimately, like, you are the expert on your own life and your own relationships.
Trust your instincts, communicate openly, and, never stop learning and growing, both individually and as a couple.
That's all the time we have for this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.